Hello and welcome to the video. Today we are checking out the off-road vehicles from the latest update and seeing how well they do on our rally stage. For this I've chosen Small Island Mixed Stage 1. It's a fairly short track with a little bit of dirt and a little bit of tarmac to see how well the off-road trucks take that. I will also run them against a few of the older cars from previous updates to see how well they do compared to the others. But most importantly, or quite interestingly, I would say, how they compare to each other on a rally stage. These off-road vehicles, they are not afraid of a little bit of dirt. They are not afraid of any surface really, except for tarmac, I would say. They're a little bit sketchy to drive on tarmac. In general, actually, they're a little bit sketchy to drive, because you can see this car right now, the Dunekicker, that's up first. It's heavy, and it has a lot of power. But it also has very loose suspension, which is made to take up all these bumps that you can find on the off-road surfaces, but you don't find those on rally stages, so there's actually no need for all of that suspension. And it just makes the car quite loose and a little bit harder to control. A similar thing goes for the Piccolina here. It's incredibly fast. It has so much acceleration. It does actually really well on the tarmac with that acceleration. But then once you're up to speed, like, what are you going to do with that speed? Like, I've had to be so careful, especially with this car, I would say. Here, you could be going so fast if you just accelerated, but you would just not be able to do anything with that speed afterwards. You'd just crash. And I mean, this game especially is quite vicious when you crash. So with both this one and the Dunekicker, I would say especially this one, I had to be so careful. I just could not be on the throttle all the time. I really just had to be careful and make it through. That being said, I did give both of these quite a lot of tries because I did want to set a really good time and make sure I got the best out of them. So for both the Dunekicker and the Piccolina, I really did my best to set the best time I could get out of either, and the Piccolina wins. That to me makes sense. Like, they're a fairly similar setup. They have large rear wheels with a lot of traction and a lot of speed, but the Piccolina just is a little bit lighter and a little bit easier to move around the circuit than a huge off-roader. So I would say it makes sense. But I think because the Piccolina is just more dangerous and scarier to drive, you have to be a little bit more careful sometimes. So that's why the difference isn't so big. Now with the Hopper, the new version that they added to the game, it's a little bit different because this one is very easy to control, and it's a little bit of a power problem that it has. It's quite heavy with not that much power. I should say all of the cars I'm running are from the base game, and I did not modify them at all, just so that it's a fair fight, I would say, just so that you also can see how well they do compared to the cars that you can drive yourself, because they are just the stock cars from the base game. So yeah, the Hopper sets quite a slow time compared to the other ones. It was so well in control, and it had all-wheel drive and everything going for it, but it just didn't have the power. This one, however, is all-wheel drive and has a lot of power, and it's really light, especially compared to the cars that have gone before. It's just so light and so fast, and it accelerates really fast. But again, it just doesn't have the control. It's so scary to drive. So it was terrifying. But it did set a 51.003, which I'm really happy with that time. I wasn't really going to be setting any faster time just because it's so hard to drive. And I would say that this one is very much the opposite. This is, I think, the Stambecco, and it's so easy to drive. It just doesn't really go. That's the problem with this one. It doesn't accelerate. I mean, it obviously does, but compared to the other cars, the power to weight ratio is very different. But the thing with the Stambecco is that it actually turns really well. If you want to go left, you turn left, it goes left. It just doesn't complain. With all of the other cars, it's just been a little bit scary to turn, but this one just, like, I would expect it to understeer a little bit, such a big truck, but it just does not. It's really good. The only downside is the gearbox, I would say. It just takes ages to change gear. So if you make a mistake with that and you're in the wrong gear at the wrong time, you lose so much time. Surprisingly though, it sets a 56.974, which is not great, but it's not nearly as far away from like the hopper as it could have been. It's quite impressive, I would say, for something that doesn't have such good top speed or acceleration. Next up is the ambulance. There was already an ambulance version for the D series, I believe, but there is now also an off-road version of that ambulance. So, I mean, I had to run it because it is new with the update, but it's more participating rather than competing. It's really just not as fast as the other cars. So let's not look at the full run there. That's just slightly painful, I would say. Speaking of painful, this was not fun either. I cried all the way through this run because the whole steering system is that of a tank. Like it can have either side of the wheels turn whilst the other stays stationary. So the fastest way to get around was to kind of throw it around, like just go full left, full right, and just see what happens. Because you can steer, you can have like slightly more steer speed from one side than the other and make careful turns, but they were, yeah, you understeered quite a lot, so they were a little bit sketchy. And then up next is what I would say is my favorite car, possibly in the game. I think the new Dunekicker truck is also really cool, but this is my favorite car from before the update for sure, because it has amazing suspension, like a really cool suspension model compared to any of the other cars in the game. There's nothing like it, because it's set up like a modern rally car, which I find fascinating to see real life footage. It's insane how they can just have their wheels on the ground all the time, and how soft the suspension is and how nicely they come down from landings without even bouncing a little bit. So yeah, I love running that car, and I think this is also the perfect place for it. It's a modern rally car, so of course it's going to set the absolute best time yet, and it's going to obliterate all of the times from the off-road cars. Something that is a contender for the rally car though is the Scintilla. It's the supercar in the game, and it's really fast, but I've chosen the off-road version. And I like to think of it more as a rally version, because I mean it has very stiff suspension, the supercar of itself. So if you make that into like softer off-road suspension, it doesn't really become an off-road vehicle, I would say. It's more of a rally car, and it has a lot of power. So I think that makes it a pretty good contender for this kind of course, but it doesn't quite have the same suspension as the modern rally car. It's not the same, so it bounces around a little bit more. And I think that's where most of the time goes, really. It doesn't have quite the same handling. But it's close, it's not too far away. And it does beat everything else, all of the off-road vehicles that have gone before. Now, we have run the Stambecco before. It had the 6-wheel version go before, but I thought because it was surprisingly good on that, I wanted to give this one a go, because this is the smaller version with only 4 wheels, and I put all of the power in it, just because this is a much lighter version, and I think I put in more power even than the rally truck has. I had to give this a go, just like I said, just because the Stambecco had a surprisingly good time. I wanted to see what you could get out of this. So this is the only car in the whole competition that is not being run stock, just to see what happens. Unfortunately, it's not that good. It's still going to be the slowest of like the actual off-road vehicles. Of course, it's going to be faster than the previous Stambecco that we ran, and the Wydra and the ambulance. But what I did want to run another stock version of though is the Dunekicker, because I probably complained earlier in this video about the suspension for the Dunekicker. It's a little bit too soft, and like the weight gets transferred left and right all the time, and that actually makes it very hard to drive. And this is the stadium version of the truck, which is made for tarmac, and that makes it so much more suitable to this rally stage. It has a much more stable handling, which I really enjoy, and it has a similar amount of power, so it actually probably is going to do better than the other Dunekicker. But let's look at the results. Last place goes to the Wydra, not surprisingly, and 10th place goes to the ambulance. Both of them are just much slower than the rest, so they didn't quite set the best time they could have possibly had for those two. I did really go for a good time with the rally truck, and it did get a 56.974, which is pretty decent for what it is. And the modified version, the smaller one with much more power, gets an 8th place with 54.259, which is actually a pretty decent time, especially if you compare it to 7th place, the Hopper off-road version, which has a 53 seconds. That one kind of just lacks the power to weight ratio. 6th place goes to my favorite truck, the Dunekicker. Unfortunately, it doesn't do so well in this competition, with a 51.837, still very decent time. But faster is the Piccolina in 5th place, not by such a large margin, but it is lighter and faster in accelerating, so it does make sense. However, it was very dangerous to drive, and so is the next in line, the 4th place, going to the Rockbasher. With these vehicles, it's a real game of risk versus reward. You want to push them, but you just can't if you want to live. So it was very fun to drive them around the track and see what they could manage. Now the 3rd place goes to the other Dunekicker, which makes me very happy, since it is my favorite truck. It did actually do best out of all of the off-road vehicles that I ran here. It's actually exactly a second faster than the other version of the Dunekicker, and it did really, really well, I would say. It's not surprising that 2nd place goes to the Scintilla and 1st place goes to the modern rally car, the FCV. I think it was a lot of fun to run all of these different vehicles on this track. And I'm actually really impressed with the performance of the off-road vehicles, because they really are not made for this. Like, they have the suspension set up to absorb these huge bumps and be able to do all sorts of different things. And yet they do fairly decently on a rally stage. So that was really fun to see. As you can see, I have some of the outtakes for you, but for now I'll say I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye!